Hi, I'm Brian Bachelder, and this is New Horizons in Bonsai, the show that teaches you a new method so you too can enjoy success with bonsai indoors and out. Now, last week we were discussing the bougainvillea, and we made one, and I've got one here today to look at, and we're all set. So let's step over here. Here is the bougainvillea that's all trimmed up. We were trimming last week and discussing aspects of directional pruning. Remember that the tropical trees in particular, with this new method, grow so rapidly that you have a free rein with your directional designs. You don't have to worry about whether or not growth is going to be there when you need it. Chances are, if you feed on schedule and you take good care of your trees, they're going to grow in so many directions at once that you'll be able to always choose which directions you like best. Now, for instance, this little tree here, this bougainvillea, has only been trained for 2 years. And as you can see, the foliage is in nice open canopies. They're in nice compact groups. There's a nice relationship from one to the other. And there's this interesting design in the trunk and in the major branches. And this is solely through pruning, never, ever wiring. Wire's fine if you're very, very careful with it, but the tropicals really don't need any wire. They just grow too fast. So now let's get out our nursery bougainvillea and take a look at that one for comparison. We'll move this guy over. Here's our nursery plant. And it's a beautifully grown subject, a very nice one. As you can see, the branches are rather rangy. They're growing straight up. This is the typical habit for this bougainvillea. This particular species or cross has very small leaves for a bougainvillea, so that's great. It's going to be a nice subject. Let's take a look at this little trunk down here. As you can see, it's got a really nice shape. There's some exposed roots already. There's heavy growth down low, a nice spreading habit. So if you imagine this tree with the upright growth lopped off, we're going to wind up with a very tree-like feature right underneath. That's what my wife always says to me. Every time I come in with something new, she says patiently, "Yes, dear, that's very tree-like." So that's what we're going to do for today. Let's do a little pruning first so that we don't have this large plant in the way while we're working. Now you can use regular shears if your hands are strong enough, or you can get out the big boys and use these loppers. Just get right in there. Be sure and use the thin blade with the hammer section away from your plant so that you're able to make a nice clean cut. And as I look at this, I'm going to imagine this a year or two down the road with the cuts all healed over, and let's make our first cuts. I think what I'll do is use these hand pruners. And first I'm going to remove this limb right here. This has a nice, smoothly flowing small limb right next to it. So that's the thing you want to look for, is a nice, uninterrupted rhythm so that when you make your cuts, they won't be very noticeable. There goes that one. And this, don't worry about this. This will heal over very shortly. These other branches will carry on nicely. Let's shorten these. You can see here how this branch terminates into several smaller ones. By eliminating the big ones out of here, you'll be able to simulate an uninterrupted flow from this tree. Don't be afraid of pruning. You're not hurting the plant. Plants are made to accommodate a loss of foliage. If you believe in a divine plan or something like that, plants are made to be eaten. They're built so that they regrow lost parts. They stand up to hurricane, to destruction. They're very at home with being pruned. It's really the best way to keep a plant healthy. Now let's remove, here you see again several small branches coming out of this larger one right here. So by eliminating this larger one, we have the smaller ones to continue the visual design of the limb so that it doesn't just end in an ugly stump. Also, if we can take a very close look at this branch, you will see right in here these little alternate bumps, and those are the buds that are waiting to grow out and take their place as new branches. This little plant is extremely covered with what we call adventitious buds because they're ready to adventure out and take their place. So when you see a plant like that, you can be very comfortable about pruning it. It's a very safe endeavor because there's lots of replacements waiting. So we're going to trim this up here. Now this plant is a little one-sided over here, so you can either make this your front or you can plan on tipping the tree when you pot it so that the design is a little more balanced. Now we've got our foliage here pretty well pruned. Now here is a good opportunity to clear out a little portion. Maybe you can see this branch right here and the way it grows down and very close to this branch. So I think we need to make a choice of whether we're going to keep this one or this one. And since I happen to like lots of horizontal low growth the way this branch is, let's eliminate this one that's in its way. Branches are very much like verbal statements. You don't need a variety of them over and over repeating themselves. So we'll clean that up. Now that's looking more like something we can work with. It's already quite tree-like. Let's take it out of the soil and see what the roots look like. Clear the decks. Set this aside. And we'll get out our dirt tray. Start horsing this out of the dirt. Now remember, with something like this, it's a simple thing. Just put your hands so that your fingers are around the trunk so that you can catch it when it comes out of the pot. Turn it upside down. If you're like me, you like to do this in your new clothes. If you're a sensible person, you'll probably want to do this outside. So hold the trunk and start clearing away this soil. This has some great surface roots. We're going to have a beautiful subject right away with this. Bougainvilleas are rampant growers in Florida and Louisiana, California, Mexico. They're used for hedge plants. They take cuttings very easily. They come a variety of beautiful colors. I don't know what color this one is. Probably an orange. But we'll find out when it blooms later in the year. Yes, clear this dirt out of here. Use your fingers to push that soil out from around the roots. Oh, this is spectacular. We're going to have a nice little tree right away. Again, it's an excellent subject of it's a good example of a beautifully grown plant, wonderfully grown plant. These growers have done a beautiful job stepping the plant up through its various sizes. And now I'm going to step over to the sink. You'll really want to do this in a tub or outdoors. Do not do this in your kitchen sink. Rinse that out. Oh, this is great. This is gorgeous. There it goes. This is really a wonderful shape. Look at all those nice roots. The trunk doesn't just stop in a stump. It bends all around. Most of the small roots are coming out a little further down, so we can expose a good number of these. This is going to be a spectacular subject to work with. Now let's just prune the roots a little bit. Let's get our hand pruners. And let's imagine this root ball flat, right across the bottom here. Let's just trim this flat. Roots are just like branches. If you trim them, they immediately have adventitious buds that will break out and start replacing what's missing. And as you prune, try to keep in your mind a nice flat idea in your mind of the root ball, so that it gives it something to sit on. It has a flatness that will help stabilize the tree when it's in its pot. This is great. This is so beautifully grown. It's going to be a simple thing to work with. Now put that aside. There's a great example. Look at that. I just put it down and it stands up. That's a very, very nice little root ball. Let's get rid of this so that we can bring our sphagnum up here. Now get our tub of sphagnum. Here it is. We've got some soaking already, but for those of you that haven't seen this or just love to see it over and over, like I do, here's the dry sphagnum out of the hobby bag or the bale, depending on how you get it. Just put that right in the water. And of course, if you're doing this at home, you don't need to have sphagnum pre-soaked. This is just soaked for the show. So wet that up, work it with your hands, knead that stuff in there so that it absorbs that water. Work to rupture those cells and get those cells absorbing all that water. And you're all set to start. Now, there's a variety of pots that you can use. Let's wipe this off while we talk about our pots. There are the traditional bonsai pots, of course, and they are gorgeous. They tend to be low and flat, and I have some of them down here. This is a nice one. This is very typical in that it's flat and wide with good drainage, 4 good drain holes right in the bottom. And it's a glazed, it's a nice container. There are these smaller ones, which are, of course, too small for this guy here today. Now what we're going to do today is we're going to use a very simple, plain clay saucer. And what I've done is I've taken the clay saucer and I have knocked a small hole in the bottom. The hole does not need to be neat, doesn't need to be clean. It just needs to be large enough to accommodate the drainage. Sometimes I knock these clean through so that it's really just a rim around the edge. Sometimes they don't need any pot. They might be on a rock. We'll be looking at some things on rocks a little later. But for this, let's use this little saucer right here. Now we'll get our water catching pan and our little taboulet right there, and we'll put our pot down. And the first thing to do, of course, is to put in that little pad of sphagnum that gets us started. And we'll just put that in there. This is just to make sure that there's sphagnum right in the bottom. And then we're going to take this. This is going to be great. It's going to help us by holding it. We're going to hold this over the sphagnum, and we're going to begin to stuff small quantities of sphagnum in and around the roots. And as you can see, it's doing everything it can to help us. It's just holding that right in there. It's just like if you've ever broiled live soft-shell crabs. You give them a little pat of butter, and they hold it while you put them under the broiler and watch them wave goodbye. So hold this under here. Fill in all those little gaps. And in about the length of time the Maryland crabs have turned red, we're ready to bring the baby bonsai over to its pot. Now, if you're not certain you've filled in all the gaps, take a little more time. Go ahead and spend a little more time doing this. We'll settle this guy down. Personally, as you can see from the trees around me, I'm fond of rather high mounded plantings. So I'm going to settle this in and decide on the angle or the attitude I want it to take. And then I'm going to work to settle this in there. Here's a gap right here. So that's a good place to tuck some more of this moss in. Just force that in there with your fingers. And remember, don't worry so much about hurting the roots. If you get the tree well packed in a sphagnum, it will heal itself. It's more important that the tree be tight than the roots be undamaged. If any of you have ever repotted orchids, that's an even more bizarre experience. Transplanting orchids with a mallet or a small sledgehammer, smashing them into the medium. So settle that in, begin to squeeze it, begin to settle it down. Feel with your fingers as you work your fingers around so that you can find all those little gaps. And we're going to expose quite a few of these handsome roots here. The rule of thumb about how to know which roots you can expose is if the root is thick enough to have grown a little bark or has a little color on it, then it's all right to expose. For instance, see this thick root here and how it has this kind of almond color. Well, that's a growth of bark, and the only reason it's light like that is because it's never seen the sun. But as soon as that gets light, it's going to brown up just like this. It's very similar to celery blanching. When you cover celery with a basket or a bag, or if you're really 20th century, a super fancy mechanical blancher, it will turn nice and white like that, so that people will have nice white celery hearts when they go to the store. Now pack all this moss in there. This is going very well. I think we're going to leave this big root up here very exposed so that we can show some of the other roots further down. You see how I work my fingers in there? I mean, my fingers are in there. And just press that moss so that it settles down and takes that shape. Just work, squash that water out, and that's pretty well done now. Now we're just about ready for our coating of decorative moss that we always finish the trees with. Let's get rid of this. And let's get our decorative moss. And now it's the same procedure as before. We're going to lay large sections of moss across the top of this. And we're going to snuggle the moss right up to the roots. And as we do this, we're going to squeeze that moss in there so that the water from the sphagnum squishes through the decorative moss on the top. And that will help stick it. That helps it to adhere to the surface. And there's a variety of mosses you can use. Any local variety you can find is just fine. There's a variety of small-leafed plants, some of them with the nasty name like liverworts. Liverworts are a beautiful, beautiful little plant, actually. They don't look anything like liver. I don't know what genius named them liverworts, but they're wonderful for this. They creep across the surface. There's baby tears. That's a popular plant up north for pot growing. There's artillery fern, which appears all by its magical self down here. Let's look through here and find some really nice pieces of moss for this. And as you work the moss in, be sure and push it under the edge of the pot so that it looks very settled in. Just keep working that moss all around. Okay. Oh. Okay, we're working around here. Just keep pressing that moss in, getting it all settled in. And you can see the tree become older right in front of your eyes. Now, this is not to say that this method of bonsai is not as spiritual as the others. If you want to take more time with your trees, and I can assure you, I look at my trees several times every day, and I spend long hours just being with them, absorbing the wonderful, mysterious energy they give off. There's no shortcoming in spirituality about this method. It's just that you get more mature results faster. And for many of us who are retired, that's an important decision. Also, I think in America in particular, we tend to feel that if you can have something today, why wait 30 or 40 years? Personally, I agree with that. This little tree is looking very nicely established in a matter of minutes, and we're just about ready to hose her down, clean this up, so that we can get on to our discussion about pots. So wet this down. This is just water in this sprayer. Tuck that moss into that pot. There we go. And we're all set. Here is our little bonsai. Let's get rid of this. And here is the bonsai. Let's just trim a little bit more off of this part. And let's open this center up. And I think we're all set to put this in a semi-shady place and wait for it to grow back, so that as the growth comes back out, we can begin shaping and planting our canopies. Now, I used this flat saucer today. We could just as easily have used a large rock under those roots, so the roots draped over. For instance, here is this little Australian pine on its rock, and it's just simply sitting on this rock. You can see the string I used. And in a little longer time, I'm going to cut that string and take that off of there. Here's another example. This Ficus benjamina, which is not on anything. It's on a tile. That's all it's on, an ordinary tile that just sits underneath there. So there's really no pot at all, just that little tile to give it a little visual organization. We can sometimes start with these ordinary saucers. This is just a typical saucer that you might put under a potted plant to catch the water on your patio or whatever. And the thing to do is, if you have a drill, you can use a carbide drill bit to drill a hole, or I just use a nail and a hammer and just whack my way through there. They're very inexpensive. If they fall and break, or if you break it in getting the hole in, there's no harm done. The moss tends to grow all over the outside, and that's always nice. It looks great. Now, this was the bougainvillea. Now for next time, let's take a look at this snow queen. This is a snow queen hibiscus, and we're going to be making one of these into a bonsai. And I have my nursery plant right here. I'll just grab that. And believe it or not, this plant is going to wind up being very similar to this one. We're going to be trimming this back. You can see it's got these great flowers. This is the characteristic hibiscus flower with the petals curling back. and the little part going out here. It's got the variegated foliage, which is a plus. It'll grow in a south, west, or east window up north. It'll grow outdoors down in the south. It's a great little subject, beautifully grown plant. So that's what we'll be doing next time. This is going to be a good opportunity for some directional pruning here. There's lots to be cut away. So this is the Snow Queen hibiscus. So put this baby in the shade, put it gradually into more light, keep it misted, and until next time, remember to look for the beauty in small places. Hi, I'm Brian Bachelder, and welcome to New Horizons in Bonsai, the show that teaches you how to have success with your own bonsai trees. Remember, we're doing a new method. It bears very little relation to the traditional method, and I'd just like to take a moment to say something about that. The traditional method is perfect. It's a wonderful thing in itself. The only thing is it just doesn't quite work in some areas, and it does not work with tropical trees as well as the new method. So stick with this method, give it your best shot, don't make any changes, follow all the directions, and you can have success too. Now, last time we talked about hibiscus, and today we have two examples of hibiscus plants grown as bonsai, different sizes, and we've got a nursery bonsai we're going to do as well. So let's go on over and see what we've got. Here we go. Here is the coral hibiscus, and this is a nice little specimen here. And while it's not in bloom, I can point out to you several bloom buds, which will be in bloom probably in another day or two. Here is a typical hibiscus flower. This obviously is red, but they come yellow, white, pink, varieties. They come double, they come single. These will do wonderfully outdoors in tropical areas or in southern windows in northern areas. Beautiful for the greenhouse, a good commercial plant. They're very, very popular. As you can see, this particular plant here has large roots along the bottom, and if you look right here, you'll be able to see an old cut stump, and that's because this tree was originally a root division. We're going to be talking a little about propagation as the series continues. Root division is simply taking a section of root that is exposed to the air, and plantlets generally begin there, and just simply separating that. So this tree was grown from a simple root division in 4 years. So this is a good example of the kind of quick maturation we can get with these tropicals. Now, if you look inside here, you will see that there is some string which is pulling this section down. This is the most bending I ever do. I do not use wire. I just use a little string to pull these branches down a little. And what happens is in about 6 months to a year, they've taken the set and they stay there without the string. The interesting thing about these coral hibiscus is that when you tie the branches down, the plant responds almost immediately by coming into bloom, which is a mature response. So by tying the branches down, you've fooled the plant into assuming it's mature, and it then behaves in a mature fashion. Now, that's the coral hibiscus. Here is a variety referred to as the Snow Queen because of this variegated foliage. And all variegated means is that it has little streaks of white all through the leaves. And this is a Snow Queen flower right here. And if I had not shorn this tree, if I had not cut it back so it would have a very good shape for the show, it would have had flowers. So these will bloom. You can see right here, this is a leaf from the nursery plant. And while the leaves are various sizes all across this little tree, here is a good representative. You can see the sort of very small reduction that you get. The leaves get smaller and smaller, and as a matter of fact, as I look at this, here is an even better one, just a little difficult to show because it is so small. So the secret is to continue clipping and pinching the ends of the new growth, and it will continually grow out smaller and smaller. Now let's get our nursery plant and set this up. This is going to be very nice to do. Here's our nursery plant, looking a little ungainly at the moment, but it's got the flowers that we like so much. It's got a good growth of all this nice foliage. But the key point here is that it has good branches down low. You see these horizontal branches down low is exactly what we can work with. And an added plus is that the trunk is divided in the center so that we can have a more interesting arrangement. So we'll see what we can do with that after we get it out of the soil. Now let's just consider for a moment how we're going to do this, because remember, you always want to have a firm idea of what you're going to do before you start in with those pruners. Once you cut it, it's gone, at least for a few months till you can grow it back. Here's our schematic diagram of the Snow Queen, and you can see the long arching branches which, for our purpose, need to go. The red areas indicate the cuts we're going to make along the roots and along the branches, and the little red dots indicate these areas of buds. And as you look up and down this branch, you will see that there are little tufts of leaves coming out about every 3/4 of an inch or so, and each one of these can give rise to another branch. So there is practically an infinite number of possibilities here for how to prune this. So let's get started. I think the first thing to do is take it out of the pot. But before we do anything, let's trim this foliage back, because this is just too large to comfortably work with. Since we know we're going to want a small, compact shape like the other Snow Queen, I think we can pretty arbitrarily just trim away quite a bit of this, just to give ourselves some working space. Don't worry that you knock things over, or that you're trimming off all the flowers, because the flowers are temporary, and in fact hibiscus make new flowers every day. The flowers only last a day. So just trim this back. And while it looks like I'm being very casual, remember there are more than a few years of experience here. Take your time when you do your pruning. You don't have the time limitation. You can step back, turn your plant often as you work so you can see it from a variety of angles. And as a matter of fact, here is an excellent opportunity for some directional pruning. If you can look right down here, you will see that this little branch comes off the bottom of this little branch here. And if I remove this upper part, what we're going to have left is the branch going in a more downward direction. So let's do that. We get rid of that, and now you see what we've created is this branch actually bends downwards and continues growing in a downward direction. So we've changed the direction of that. That's what I mean by directional pruning. Also, while you're working, try to notice where branches crisscross one another or grow into the center, because there's no use for that. So you can immediately and arbitrarily prune those away. You don't even have to think whether they're going to be of use or not. If they're growing into the plant or crossing one another, they're not of any use. Okay, now we've got the plant down to a more manageable size. Let's see about getting it out of the soil. We've got our little soil bucket. Let's hold the plant in one hand and work with the fingers of the other hand. Get this soil out of here. Hibiscus have soft roots, kind of fine roots. Don't worry about damaging them. It's more important to get all the soil out than to go easy on the roots. If you think you're doing the plant a favor by being more gentle and not removing all the soil, you set the plant up for a lot of problems later. So we'll get this out of here. If you want to rinse the soil away, that's fine to do too. Let's Especially if you're outside, you can just hose it down. That's a nice way to do it. Or if you're in somebody else's house, you can really just cut loose and get rid of all this stuff out of here. Shake that out. There we go. Now I'll set this aside. And now we'll move the diagrams. Again, do not do this at home. You will be disappointed in your plumbing if you do. Just rinsing this out. You can see the little balls of soil that are clinging tenaciously to this root ball. You want to get all those out of there. Just clean them out. This has some nice roots. This is another beautifully grown plant. When you find a nursery that you can count on, stick with them. They're not always easy to find. This is a beautifully grown plant. Okay, let's assume I've got all the soil taken out of there. I would, if I was on my own time, I'd continue to do this and get all that out, but for our purposes, this is fine. Now, this is a nice root ball. You see how basically flat it is. It's nice and flat, and the roots are spreading horizontally, so this is going to play right into what we want to do. Let's get our pruners. Don't be afraid to prune those roots. Each one of these roots has the capacity to branch, just like the top growth does. It's a good idea, though, to have pruners that really cut. Okay, so we'll just continue cutting these areas. Get that root ball nice and flat. There we go. And now, while we're holding the plant, here's a good example of a very weak little branch off to the side. It has no character. It's just a flimsy thing. And rather than try to develop this, let's just get rid of it. Here's one that's growing up. And if you take your branches and just bend them down gently, don't snap that branch, just bend it gently, they tend to stay down a lot better than they would. Just bend them down. Now let's look at this and just do a little more pruning. This is going to be a very handsome tree when we're done. Okay, we're just trimming this up to shorten it up so it's more manageable. Here are two branches that are very close together, so let's get rid of one of them. Get rid of the one that's pointing up. There we go. I think we're just about ready now to pot this up. Now, when you're choosing a pot, remember, try to choose a pot that is just large enough to accommodate the tree. You don't want to put it in a larger size than you need. So, we have this interesting pot right here, a traditional pot. And I think what we'll do is try to encourage this to spread out in a very flat way so that the majority of the surface is going away from the tree rather than being thick. So we'll put this up here. As a matter of fact, let's get our drip bucket and our pot. Put that up here. And now we have to get the tub-o moss. The giant tub of the moss. And remember, you start with the dry moss, and you just put it in the water, and you just knead this so that it's nice and wet and spongy. Knead it really well. Let it soak a little while if you need to. There's nothing wrong with soaking it in advance. Just make sure it's all good and wet. Now, I would normally need that longer, but I'm going to move right along here so that you can see this. We spread a little pad of it on the floor of the pot. And then hold the plant and begin to push the sphagnum moss into the little open areas around the roots. Spread the roots out so that they're not overlaying one another. If the roots touch nothing but other roots, it'll take a lot longer for them to heal. And if they're all comfortably cushioned by the sphagnum, they'll heal a lot faster. So then carry that over, and now decide on the attitude that you want it to take. This is an interesting double trunk. I think we'll do it that way. Now, I'm partial to the plants being set off-center. You see, I have the plant a little further to the back, and it'll be balanced by this area of foliage going forward. So now I begin the pressing process. Just begin to press the sphagnum in. Those of you that have been watching all along, this should be a pretty familiar little process. There is an amazingly small amount to this method. Compared to the traditional method, it's simplicity in itself. And I have yet to find anything I cannot grow this way. Temperate trees, in other words, trees that grow in cold weather, do just as well for me as the tropicals. But the thing that I'm so excited about with the tropicals is that this means for the very first time in the 2,500-year history of bonsai that bonsai can be grown indoors as windowsill plants, as terrarium plants, as greenhouse plants. Whereas before, if you used trees that were temperate and needed a cold weather break in the winter, you couldn't grow them indoors in the winter. Okay, now there's our landscape all set up. Let's get rid of the moss. And now we'll get our surface moss and start mossing this guy over. Just lay that surface moss on there. Let's cover the whole surface. As a matter of fact, everywhere I live, I set up a little moss factory. I just keep one part of my yard in the shade. I keep it well watered. I don't grow anything there. Whenever I have leftover fertilizer, I throw it in that spot. And in a little while, we get moss showing up all on its own. No bonsai looks done until it gets the moss. Now I'm hurrying here to accommodate all of the things I'd like to show you today, but when you do this yourself, take your time, try to be as artistic as you can, and then press this moss into place. Try to make sure each piece makes good contact. Don't be afraid to work that moss like it was dough or clay or putty. Just work that in there. If it makes good contact, it'll spring up and be fluffy and green and beautiful in just a couple days. If you do not let it make good contact, it will never conduct the water that it needs. So just press it down real good. And now's the time to do something interesting with this landscape. Let's cut this in with our fingers so that there are some very definite little hills and valleys. Let's mold this area along here. See, I'm cutting in with my fingers. Now I'm feeling under there so that I don't break any roots, but wherever I feel no resistance, I just push my fingers in there to create something a little more interesting than an ordinary flat surface. There we go. There, that's fine. And now we'll take another look at this top growth, and we'll see if we aren't able to do something a little more interesting with it. Let's shorten some of these up. And as I cut them, I'm going to cut them so that the growth that's left insinuates the line of foliage continuing so that it isn't just a little stump. These cuts will heal right over in the next couple of weeks, and the plant will carry on like nothing happened to it, and it's going to be a beautiful little tree in a very short length of time. This is going to be very nice. You just reach around, make your pruning decisions. Don't be worried. There we go. And I think we're just about done with the pruning on this one. Let's see what we've got. Yeah, I think that looks fine. Just trim that back. I like to remove the leaves also from the large areas of trunks. It makes them look a little older. Just pull those leaves out of there. Makes them look quite a bit older. There. Okay, now let's wet this down. Get our sprayer. Spray this down. Now keep this well watered. Keep it in partial shade until you see signs of new growth, which would be either fresh new foliage or little white roots popping out the drain holes. And you're all set. Mist it often, help it recover. And there's a beauty right there. Now let's talk about when you have a bonsai that is already established. For instance, in the traditional method, you would have to clear away all of the old soil. You'd have to mill new soil. You'd have to grade the soil in various layers. You'd have to completely clean out the root ball. Here we have a juniper which is ready to repot in the new method. And what we're going to do is just set it in a new pot and add moss to it. Small quantity of stones. We can just set this in its pot here and add moss. So here we go. We're just going to add moss to this. There's no need to disturb the old planting. Just add to it. And in no time at all, the roots will fill right out into the new sphagnum. Now this is a case where no root pruning is needed. If you need to do root pruning, we'll be covering that very shortly in another show. And again, of course, add the moss. Pack this down so it's nice and tight. And this will be just fine for this little tree. Now, of course, if I was going to take the time to finish this, I would continue with the moss all around, pat it down just like we've been doing, make sure all the seams are good. And as you can see, this is an attractive pot for this kind of plant. It's got a nice shape, it's got a nice balance, there's nice empty space all around it. It's a very dramatic little planting. But I'm not going to take the time to do that because I would like to tell you about pesticides. There's only 2 products you need to know about when it comes to these bonsai. One is called malathion, which is a spray, and the other is called liquid copper fungicide. The malathion takes care of insects. The liquid copper takes care of the mildew and fungus. And the thing to do is to take a sprayer, and all you have to do is add a small quantity of each of these to the water. Follow the directions on the back. But the reason I like these in particular is that they're perfectly safe to mix. Just add a quantity of these to the water, and then shake it up good. But again, do be sure and follow directions. I did not measure for the sake of time. And then all you need to do is take your bonsai and spray that on there, and the bugs are history. That's all there is to the insect and fungus care. It's a good idea to try to not let this liquid drip on the moss. Now next time we're going to be talking about the ficus family. But for now, you've got your hibiscus. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Brian Bachelder, and welcome to New Horizons in Bonsai. I'm excited to be here today because we're going to discuss something very interesting that you're going to be very happy with. I call it aggregate grafting. All it means is planting several small plants close enough so that when they expand, the tissue welds together and they grow just like they were one plant. There's nothing cruel about this, there's nothing unusual about this, and many people who have fences have noticed that trees often engulf wires or even posts or rocks as they grow. It's a completely natural, normal plant response, and that's all we do here. I'd like to address one little issue briefly. Someone once said to me, "Isn't bonsai cruel because you're always trimming them?" There's nothing cruel about mowing your lawn, there's nothing cruel about trimming your hedge, and there's nothing cruel about trimming bonsai. They appreciate the care we give them, and in fact, you would not get a luxuriant head of foliage like you get with a properly grown bonsai if it was not in tip-top shape. So let's step over here now and take a look at the examples for today. Now, right over here, we have this big boy. This is a Ficus benjamina, the common weeping fig, which you can see either thriving or dying in most offices or doctors' offices, dentists, banks. It's very popular indoors up north, and it's a popular hedge plant down south. It's a wild thing down in South America and in Africa, and it's very, very common as a house plant. Let's take a close look right up here. And you'll see what I'm talking about. You can see how the roots have grown together and the tissue is beginning to mass as one solid piece. The ficus species as a whole family do this all on their own, but the aggregate grafting steps it up, so you get this results in a hurry. And in fact, let's just take a moment to look at this entire tree. Let me turn it slowly for you so you can see all of the canopies of foliage and the way they're all clear from one another. This tree visually competes with traditionally grown bonsai that may be 20 or 30 or even 50 years old or more, but in fact this tree is about to be 5. So this is an example of the kind of results you can get with these tropical species. Now right next to this we have some other representatives of the ficus family. This is a little Ficus nidea, which is another common hedge plant here in Florida and is found throughout florists and nurseries up north as a nice little house plant. I would say a southern or west exposure. Very easy to grow, and you can see, if you look closely here, you can see the beautiful aerial roots that the tree pops out all by itself. And they, as soon as they touch down, they thicken up, and it's a beautiful subject. You'll also notice on this little tree a variety of sizes of leaves. And I'm going to try to hold one of the smallest ones so that you can see it. It's going to be difficult because it is so small, but that is a normal leaf that this plant has produced from the pinching and pruning. Now, if a person only has a few and they have plenty of time to do this, simply by pinching the ends of the new growth off in your fingertips or with a tool, you can encourage this reduction in foliage. I have 130 of these, so I don't have a lot of time to spend on each one, so you'll notice various sized leaves. Now this one here is a beauty for its roots, and you can see that the branch foliage is just a little different than on the other one. It's popped out all these aerial roots by itself, and you can see that it's growing in a very small amount of the medium. I'll take this out of the pot so that you can see, once again, how our medium stays together. There's no danger of that coming apart, and it makes the root pruning very, very easy on an established tree. We're going to be discussing that a little later, too. Now, right next to this one, we have another representative of the ficus family, which is found throughout plant stores and nurseries all across the country. This is Ficus rubiginosa, and these leaves are reduced by about 3/4. In other words, a normal leaf would be about this big. This is a handsome plant in that the foliage is a little thicker than the others, and it's nice, dark, waxy green. It has the typical aerial roots, and in fact, if you look closely here, you'll be able to see that the roots are actually encircling and engulfing the pot. And when the ficus do this to the extent that I can't get them out without damaging the pot, I simply break the pot and plant the whole thing in a larger pot of sphagnum and let the pot just fall apart. Now, right behind me, I have another example of the ficus. This is Ficus aurea, which is known as the strangler fig, because this ficus almost always begins its life in the top of a cabbage palm, which has a lattice work of old boughs up and down its trunk, and this ficus is usually planted by birds at the very top. And the roots circle their way down, and as soon as they touch down into the soil, they blow up and expand into tree trunks, which then strangle and kill the host cabbage palm. And then the ficus carries on by itself without it. You can see the typical aerial roots encompassing the surface here, and you can see the nice horizontal spread of foliage, which I always try to encourage solely through pruning. So now let's put these aside and let's look at the subject for today. Today I went to a nursery and I got a typical ficus tree, just as anyone would find. And we're going to take it out of the soil and do a little pruning, and then we're going to take these cuttings, which are all rooted, and we're going to aggregate graft them. Now, if you want to take cuttings from a ficus tree, simply remove sections of the branch. If there are any leaves down low, pull those off, and put about 2 or 3 inches of it in damp sphagnum. Keep it in a moist, well-lit place, and in about 3 weeks, they should be rooted. I would say these cuttings are probably about 8 weeks old, and the root development is quite good. You can see that they're very nearly like little trees already, almost like seedlings. But cuttings save you a lot of time. And you're going to be taking lots of cuttings inadvertently because you're going to be trimming them anyway. So you might as well use them. Now let's get this out of the soil the way we always do. We'll just lift this out of its pot and then work with your fingers to get rid of the soil. Don't be frightened. Don't be worried. Now, any species can be aggregate grafted, but you must stay within the same species. It generally is not possible to have 2 species envelop one another and stay healthy. There's a natural competition among plants, and this is how the ficus family has learned to adapt. They simply grow around anything that's in their way, and as they spread their horizontal foliage and they send down their buttress roots and envelop everything, they simply crowd out everything else. It's not very common to find anything else growing under ficus but ficus. They also make thousands, perhaps millions, of little berries in their fruiting season because they are a member of the fig family, ficus. And so they tend to reproduce that way too, by seeds and by inadvertent cuttings in storms. The buttress roots spread out. There we go. Now let's get rid of this soil. It's so much easier working at someone else's house. Okay, and let's do a little pruning so that these guys fit into our pot. Ficus is extremely friendly to pruning. It does not mind at all. So we're going to really take a chunk out of this with the loppers. Loppers are used when something is too large for ordinary pruners if your hands aren't strong enough. And why struggle? Let's just cut this son of a gun right here. And now we're all set with something that is a good size to be potted. I think we can take a little more than that off. There we go. Now they've come apart, that's just fine. We've got a nice flat root ball here to deal with. You see this spreads out very nicely. This should be no trouble at all. No trouble at all. Now we'll just take the scissors and I'm just going to trim off the overly long ones. And now we're ready to do our grafting. What we're going to do is get out our little taboulet and put the pot right up there. And by now you know that we soak the sphagnum moss in the water, so we're going to skip that step of showing you how we soak the sphagnum. And I think before we start, we also might as well trim these up a little bit so it's not such a struggle to work with them. Let's just cut some of this off because we know we're going to want it shorter than that. There we go. Now let's get these guys started. Remember, you begin by pushing the sphagnum around the roots so that the spaces are filled up. And if you take your time and do it carefully, it'll be just fine. Now we'll spread some sphagnum around the bottom of the pot, like a little pad. Not too much. You don't want it to be overly high unless you're planning on a large mounded planting. And now begin to settle this in, begin to knead the sphagnum together so that it will stay up by itself. Hold it with one hand and work with the other. Just begin kneading and pressing that sphagnum. Kneading and pressing, pressing and kneading both together, whichever you prefer. And just keep working. Now, at about the time that this tree begins to be able to stand up on its own, you can begin with your cuttings. Pick a point where you think you would like a nice aerial root. For instance, this is probably a good area because we want to try to increase the mass of the trunk of this tree. So all you need to do is take a little sphagnum and put it around the roots of the cutting, just as if you were doing a very small plant. And place it where you'll want it in your planting. Knead that in a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend this branch down, and I'm going to bend this branch around it. And I'm going to weave it in and out of the branches. The rubber trees especially, all ficus are in the rubber tree family, are very forgiving of this. Just weave that in there, and you'll find that it stays all by itself, and it also helps hold this branch down. So continue kneading all around this to firm that up. And there's our first cutting entered. Now let's do the same with the second one. Pick another spot. Let's pick perhaps over here in front of it. Knead that in so that the bottom of it stays put. and it doesn't pull out. And if there are any really low branches, like right here, there's this low branch emanating from the bottom of this other tree, take the opportunity to introduce those two. Just add that right up there. Far from being cruel, this actually excites the tree. This is exactly the kind of thing that sends ficus crazy. They just love it. They love to add to their mass by grouping. That's how they compete in the world of the jungle. So you're actually doing something very pleasant for the plant. Remember, what suits one thing may not suit you, and just because this looks extreme does not mean you're damaging the plant. So we've got those entered in there. I will take the others. Now, how many you do is up to you and your idea of design. When I do this, I start with a general idea, but if I should change my mind, I go ahead and let myself change my mind. Now, here I'm going to weave these two to create a horizontal branch. Don't be frightened about breaking the branches with ficus because they're extremely flexible. We're going to bend this around here. And as you bring the branches up, try to have the branches exit in a natural way, so that they look like they grew themselves. I'm going to enter another one. Let's do this one on this side. And let's have it cross this other one so that in time they get together. Use this little branch. And it's perfectly all right to weave a second one or a third one over where you've already entered a new branch. And as they all continue to naturally make new branches, the effect is going to be very striking. I think we'll just take that one out. Now, another way to do this, which I'll describe while I finish this up, is to bend the branches down and simply bend them in a U shape, similar to this, and bury the U. And when it roots, instead of cutting it so that you've created a rooted cutting, cut it on the other side of the U so that you cut the foliage off. And the flow of the tissue will actually reverse, and you will have created an aerial root. But this is much faster and just as satisfactory. And if you're like me, you'll feel that you would like to have results as fast as you can. Why not? So there we go. This is looking good. Let's branch this one through here to link these two trees together. There, and that looks pretty good for the branches of the tree. Let's get rid of these that are just a little visually confusing. And now we'll finish potting this up. You finish this up just the way we always do. Add a little more moss and knead with your fingers. Try to fill in all the gaps. Fill in all the gaps and press this in so that it's all nice and solid. And then when it's all nice and solid and settled in, then of course we go for that surface moss. Somebody went to a lot of trouble today to get all this beautiful moss, so I'm happy to use it. Here's a real nice piece. If you can get the moss in large sheets, it's always nice because it goes on like a little rug. You just lay that on the surface, pull the weeds out as you work so they don't get a head start. They will show up all by themselves. And remember to lay that moss all around the ficus roots. Take your time, go all around so that it looks nice and settled in. Ficus, of course, changed the world in the late 1800s when it was discovered that a synthetic latex could be made from the sap. And anybody that's ever had to trim ficus trees know that by the end of the day you're a gummy mess. And it does not come off with soap and water. So it's a lot of fun to trim large ficus trees, let me tell you. So get this moss settled all around, and as you settle the moss in, then's the time to make your topographical details. Press and push your fingers in to get everything all settled and to create those nooks and crannies that are so much more visually interesting than a boring, flat planting. Just work with your fingers, cut and press, get this all settled in, and there, we're just about done. Now let's take a more leisurely approach to the pruning here at the top. Let's decide what are good shapes and what are not. Ficus grows rapidly, so what we're going to do is just trim this up so that we encourage the horizontal spread of the branches as opposed to a boring vertical spread. We will get rid of some of these overly large branches. And remember, although we try to make the tree look as good as possible immediately, have in mind that in a month or two it's going to settle in and it's really going to look much better than it does at the moment. So here is our aggregate graft for today. I'll turn this around so you can see it this way. And you can see that we now have a series of vertical roots that will function as aerial roots as this settles in, and we're going to get this kind of massive, large trunk development in just a few short months, perhaps. Keep working with the top, develop your canopies, and you're going to have a fine specimen in no time. Now let's put this aside, because the other reason I'm very excited to be here today is because we're going to start talking about fruit trees. Fruit trees and flowering trees. Too often I see people's bonsai collections and it's nothing but a series of junipers, perhaps a pine, some leafy maples, and it gets to be just a little redundant. So what we're going to do is start looking at some other trees. For instance, here is a tamarind. Tamarind is an unusual fruit. It's a beautiful flowering tree that makes a pod, and in the pod is a peculiar kind of jelly around the seeds. And the pods are dried and split. The jelly is extracted and mixed with either water or alcohol, and the popular Caribbean flavor of tamarind or tamarindo is made from this. This tree is only 4 years old. This was grown from a seed that went through my washer dryer, which I found in the lint trap. So always check your lint trap for seeds when you go somewhere. And as you can see, it has a beautiful branch development. I'm going to turn this slowly so that you can see more of it. And again, the horizontal branch development is solely the result of pruning. This tree has never known wire. It's never had string. It has never been bent It has never been tortured. This interesting circular development of the roots across the top is the result of this seed having sprouted in a shallow saucer. And what I've done over the 5 years this has been growing, 4 years, is to continue lifting it up and adding sphagnum underneath. Because remember, with these trees, it's a simple thing to lift them out of the pot. So instead of cutting the roots, what I sometimes do is I just add fresh sphagnum to the bottom, and I settle them back in, and I press all around the edge and introduce a little new moss, and I lift that up. The end result is that as the sphagnum wears away, you wind up with a very interesting series of roots that may be circular, they may be knotted, they may be straight up and down, and you can plan for this in your planting. You can deliberately plant things with long stilt-like roots that may not support them at the time you do the planting, but you know that in 2 or 3 years that sphagnum's going to wear away and those roots are going to be thick and stand up like stilts. That's a great effect, and we're going to be looking at some of that too. Now this little tamarind tree has not yet bloomed, but then it is only 4. I expect it will bloom and it will make fruit, and that's one of the draws with our flowering, fruiting trees. We're going to be looking at citrus, we're going to be looking at a variety of things, plums, grapes. Ordinary grapevines make tremendous bonsai. And speaking of vines, never overlook the potential in vines. If you want to make a bonsai out of a vine, it's a simple thing to stake the vine up until the vine gets woody enough that it supports itself, and then work on trimming the top foliage so that it is self-supporting and it has the canopies. You can see here how the canopies are all very clear from one another. So there's air and open space around all this. And with this kind of a compound leaf, you can trim each leaf to be shorter if you want. Now over the time, each leaf will grow out shorter anyway. So take your time, study your trees, look for the designs in things, and try to take a few minutes. It doesn't cost anything. Just look around you. Try to see the old things as new. And please look for the beauty, even in small places. Thanks, I'm Brian Bachelder. Hi, I'm Brian Bachelder, and this is New Horizons in Bonsai. You know, one of the questions I get asked a lot about bonsai is, can you use anything? And the answer is anything woody. The reason for that is that if a plant does not contain woody tissue, in other words, stems and bark, a trunk that will last for years, there's no sense in creating a bonsai shape. If you use something herbaceous like a begonia, it's not going to last, so it must be woody. But other than that, there's very few restraints. You can use flowering material, fruiting material, and today we're going to look at a selection of popular fruiting trees that are grown extensively throughout the South and the Southwest, as well as in the greenhouse and in the nursery. So let's take a look at those now. Here we have our first selection. This is a Java plum. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold this decorative card behind here so that you can see the shape of this a little better, a little more cleanly. And I'm going to turn it so you can see it from all sides. You'll notice this very interesting growth of roots along the bottom. And you'll see that the branches are in a very pleasant horizontal pattern with a lot of little knuckles, a lot of interesting shapes. And this is solely from directional pruning. This plant has never had wire on it. It's never been tied, purely with directional pruning. This was grown from a seedling and is now going on 6 years old. So this is still a very young tree, but it has a great shape. What I'll do as I continue to repot this through the years is I'll continue to lift it out of the pot and I'll put more sphagnum underneath it so that I can continue this exposure of the roots, which are very interesting. So this is our Java plum. Now, let's look at another subject. Last week, we had a look at the tamarind, which was grown from a seed. And this tamarind is 4 years old, going on 5. and it has these compound leaves, beautiful horizontal foliage. The tamarind seeds would be available either from saving the seeds from fresh fruit or perhaps from some special order nurseries. Very occasionally you find them in greenhouses for greenhouse use as a flowering tropical in a large greenhouse. But if you find one, snap it up because they're very choice. So this is our tamarind. Now here is an example of a vine as a bonsai. This is a wild Florida grape. I'm going to hold our card back here so that you can get a good look at it. This wild Florida grape is just a ranging vine that is found all throughout the South, as well as far north as the Carolinas. You can use northern grapes, or if you want to get good Concord grapes or wine grape vines, any kind of woody vine makes a great bonsai. And I've used the vining nature of the tree to encourage this twisty pattern, and the horizontal foliage here is just a natural development of pruning. You'll notice also that this does not have a pot. This is just simply sitting on the counter, free of a pot. The sphagnum medium does not require a pot. So this little subject could sit on a tile or a flat piece of slate or just directly on the bonsai table in the garden. Now here, let's set this here. Here is a citrus. This is a kumquat. And this little tree is from a nursery seedling, which has been cut back severely and allowed to grow out. The foliage is very reduced. It's much smaller than usual. And you see the interesting shape here of the roots. I'll turn this slowly so that you can see it from other angles. And some interesting winding fat roots along the top. This is in a plastic saucer. Saucers don't have to be clay. And you can see that it pops right out. And this allows you to see the roots clearly and decide if the plant needs repotting or not. There's our kumquat. Now here is a very popular orange down here. This tree does not have a finished overall shape, but the trunk and the root development was so spectacular that I decided to work with it anyway. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be working on getting these horizontal branches to fill out and work on good dense canopies of foliage through pruning and cutting and pinching. And you can see here a typical response to all this pruning is that the plant has sent out a small growth right here that's just popped right out of the bark, and it's going to grow up. And this is what trees do. They just pop branches out from their sides where they need them. So if you find a subject that has a trunk and a root development that's too good to pass up, try to work with it and try to develop it, keep it well fed, and you'll find that it fills right out. We're going to be talking about feeding today, incidentally. Now the subject for today, since we're dealing with fruiting trees, is an avocado, which still has its nursery tag. The avocado is a popular houseplant subject. Most everybody's sprouted one from the fruit, the pit of the fruit. They're easy to grow, they're not demanding, and they make great bonsai. So let's take this out of the soil and get this ready for its new life. As usual, we just simply take this right out of the pot. And just break away this soil. Work to get that soil off. This is a beautifully grown plant. There's hardly any roots circling. If you start one in water, you can immediately transfer it to sphagnum without bothering with soil culture at all. As a matter of fact, to start your plants directly in sphagnum is the easiest thing, and that's how I started this whole sphagnum method. When I first moved to Florida, I was not pleased with the changes my bonsai underwent. It's a different climate. There's a different set of needs, a different set of responses. There are long periods of drought and long periods of rain every day. And I found that the soil culture was just prone to an awful lot of discouraging factors. But I did notice that the plants I was starting in sphagnum were great. They were fine. And that the sphagnum, if it fell over on a windy day or whatever, did not change shape. It kept its basic shape. So I started leaving them in the sphagnum. Now, a lot of people say to me the sphagnum has no nutrients, so you can't leave things in there. Well, it's true the sphagnum has no nutrients, but we feed every week. And when you see how easy the feeding is, you'll see that that's not a sacrifice to have beautiful bonsai. So there's our plant out of the dirt. Get rid of the soil. And we'll start our potting. There we go. Now we're going to have to prune this because it has a large, thick center right down here. But luckily there are a lot of roots right up at the surface, so I think we can eliminate a great deal of this trunk and still come out ahead. We'll use our loppers and we'll just take that right off of there. And while we're at it, let's take off the little nursery tag. This tree was selected because it has these interesting low branches right here. This is going to be nice to work with. We'll just trim this rangy section off. And now we're all set to repot this. Let's just eliminate some of these leaves. Remember, in addition to branch pruning, you can also do simple leaf pruning, which is literally taking off some of the leaves. The important thing is when you repot, you've damaged roots, so you must make a corresponding reduction in the foliage that the damaged roots must now support. If you think about it, it's a pretty common sense kind of thing. Just consider that you've impaired the plant's ability to pull up water, and so you've got to relieve it of the responsibility of having to do that. And by trimming the leaves, you also encourage that response that makes them send out new growth. It's also a little easier to see the basic shape of the plant. So now we're all set for our repotting. I think we can use a traditional bonsai pot for this. This will be kind of nice. We'll settle that right in there. That's a good space. Decide which side to plant it on. So I think what I'm going to do is plant this off-center and balance it with these other branches that are hanging over. We can decide if we want it slightly to one side or the other, but I think a straight up and down is very nice, and that is very characteristic of avocados. So that'll look fine. So we've been soaking our sphagnum. Remember, we always soak the sphagnum and knead it to get it nice and wet. You've seen me do that several times now. We're going to work the sphagnum in among the roots. Take your time when you do this at home. It only looks like I'm doing this quickly because of the magic of television. We're going to settle this in so that this foliage is gracefully arching over that way. Settle that sphagnum around all the roots. Make sure that they're cushioned on every side by the sphagnum. That is critical. Critical but easy. There's nothing difficult about it. The beauty of this method is that it uses plant responses that have been understood for hundreds even thousands of years by the very first horticulturalists. The Egyptians knew about these responses. Everyone that has had a society where they grew their own harvests of food have understood about pruning and gathering, the way the roots heal. There, and that looks fine. That looks just fine. We even have a few roots at the surface to expose. So let's get our moss. Now with a simple upright subject like this, it's nice to have the simplicity of the upright tree played off by the horizontality of the pot, the horizontal nature of the pot, so that you have an almost right angle here. It's a very simple, pleasing thing, and it's perhaps even a little bit of a relief after some of the more complicated bonsai structures we've done. We lay our moss on here. If you can keep your moss in bigger sheets, it makes it a lot easier to do this. Nurseries are a good place to find moss. This came from an excellent nursery nearby, where they very kindly let me gather it up. When you select a nursery to patronize, be certain to let them know you appreciate the quality that you find there. Good nurseries are hard to find. Now, use your fingers. Now watch how I push my fingers into this. You just push your fingers in there to create those interesting ridges so that it isn't just a flat, boring planting. Don't worry about hurting the roots. The roots are very adaptive. They're having a hard day today anyway, so a little more is not going to hurt them. And I think we're going to allow this planting to be very lumpy so that it's interesting. I like an interesting surface. There. That's just about done. Now when these grow out, what you'll want to do is pinch the ends. And by pinching, I mean you can either use your fingers or you can use a tool. And what you want to do, if you look very close at the end of your branch, you're going to see a small bud. And what you want to do is use your tool to just get in there and nip that out. That's what we call pinching. Now what you've done by removing the end is you have now set the stage for all the other little buds, the adventitious buds, up and down the entire trunk to come leaping out to take their place. And by repeating this over the entire tree, you wind up with dense, bushy canopies of foliage as opposed to an open, rangy plant. So this looks just fine. We'll just clean off the outside of our pot. And there's our avocado, all set to take its place in our bonsai garden or in the greenhouse or the nursery. Now let's discuss feeding. As I've been saying, this is a different method from the traditional method. Traditionally, bonsai are fed with a very conservative, gentle mixture of either organic fish fertilizers or perhaps rapeseed cake, which is an organic compound that's pressed literally into little cakes and put onto the trees perhaps once or twice a season. The trees we're making with this method are very rambunctious. They want a lot of feeding and they want to be fed often. So what I use is a popular 20-20-20, which refers to the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potash in the mix. Just look for the numbers 20-20-20, and it's generally a blue color. So what you want to do is take a vessel such as this and put some water in here, and then take your fertilizer. I have a little bag of it right here. break it up, and put the required dosage into the water. It's generally a teaspoon per gallon. Now the easy thing to do, rather than mix the fertilizer and attempt to pour it onto the plant, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be dipping the bonsai into the water with the fertilizer in it. This is an easy thing to do. It only takes a minute, and it makes all the difference. I cannot stress the importance of the feeding enough. And it seems contradictory because on one hand, what you're doing is you're speeding up the growth of the plant. But by making the plant grow more quickly, you can then apply the principles of reduction, the pruning, the pinching, that more often. And that is the key to why you get such spectacular results. Now, I'm only going to guess at this. Please measure according to the directions. But you simply take a teaspoon or so per gallon, and you put it in your water and just mix that up. Make certain it's mixed up. Usually melts right away. And with most varieties, you'll notice that it tints the water a sort of bluish color, so that when you're familiar with it, you can do this visually instead of having to read and measure all the time. You can gauge by the color blue. Once it's mixed, then it's a simple thing. Let's use this little grape. All you have to do is lower it into the fertilizer mixture, and you'll notice the bubbles emerging. This one's soaked already. Lift it out and put it somewhere to drain. Let's do another one so you can see the bubbles perhaps a little more clearly. Just lower this right in. There they are. Just watch for the bubbles. It only takes a couple of seconds generally, and the bubbles stop. The bubbles have stopped. This tree is now fed. Take it out. Put it somewhere to drain. It's that easy. There's nothing to it. But do be sure to do this regularly. I would suggest at least once every 2 weeks. I prefer once every week so that they get everything they need. Just take your tree and put it right in. Don't worry about the water, because it's having fun right now. It's saying, oh, this is delicious, I like this. So just put that right in. You see the bubbles. And this, by the way, is a very interesting little plant. This is referred to as a kunti down here. It's in the Zamia family, which is a subfamily of the cycas, or cycads. Cycads are very popular in the tropics or in Mexico. They're very, very frequently seen as houseplants up north. They're great for the conservatory or the greenhouse. They do beautifully on a sunny window, either an east or west or south exposure. This one I grew from seed. If you want to do one more rapidly, use a nursery plant and prune it down and fit it in. And this time we've talked about fruit trees. Next time we're going to talk about ornamental foliage and flowers. We'll take our cycad out of here and let it drain. And that's all there is to it. A very simple thing. Now obviously if you're feeding a tree that is higher than your water level, it's a bit of a problem because you can't get the rest wet. If you need to, you can splash some on there. But an easier thing, of course, is to get a deeper container. What I do with the 130 so trees that I have, I just have a very large container, which is about 1.5 feet deep. I make the fertilizer, and by the time I've filled it with 6 or 7 medium-sized trees, the first one's ready to be lifted out, and I just put it right back on the tree tables out in the yard. So to do 130 trees takes me about 3 hours. So the average person, if they have half a dozen or a dozen trees, this should only take 10 minutes or so every week, and it's a very pleasant 10 minutes. Now let me show you how to repot, because it's such a simple thing. The repotting is a joy. The cornerstone of this method aside from the tremendously healthy, vibrant bonsai that you create, is the ease and the simplicity of it. Let's root prune this already established ficus. Now this looks a little scary, but don't let it get you. And honey, I'm sorry I got the steak knife. I promise I'll bring it home. So you can see where the pot was because the green moss stops. All you have to do is saw this off right where the moss stops. And to prove to you that that's all there is to it, I'm going to do this now. Just cut right through here. You don't have to worry about which roots to trim. You don't have decisions to make. Just trim the bottom off. You've removed the circling roots all along the bottom. You can see that there were only a few in the center. So now the thing to do is to take the pot, put a little more fresh moss in, and pot it up. We give this a new base. Just settle this right in here. And then push with your fingers on the edges so that you secure the plant back in the pot. If it's still shaky, you could tie it in with a little string until the new roots grow. But the roots are going to behave exactly like the branches. Now that they've been cut, the buds all up and down the length of the roots are going to be jumping to take their place because they all want the dominance over their neighbors. So by trimming those roots, what you've really done is you've encouraged the formation of the new tiny feeder roots up close to the tree, so that instead of growing long, rambling, aimless roots that do nothing for the tree but cripple it in the pot, you now have fine feeder roots up close that are nourishing the tree, bringing all the food and the nutrients up to it. And you've done the tree a big favor. Trees are pruned in nature either by harsh weather or by animals, by lightning. Lightning really prunes a tree, let me tell you. And it's just a good thing to do for them. Don't be concerned. So now we've seen not only how to create a tree, but how to repot them when they're ready, simply by visually checking. We've learned how to feed the tree. We've learned how to spray for pests. We've learned a variety of styles. We're on to the idea of not just working with foliage, but looking for flowers and for fruit. It's a tremendous wide world out there of tropicals, rare plants. Look through the phone book, hunt down in the library, look for sources for rare tropicals. There are many, many of them, sometimes in unexpected places.